Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question, and he basically said, hey, what's going on with heavy partials? You're saying you're not really a big fan of heavy partials for the most part, but aren't they useful for training your central nervous system? Aren't they useful for strengthening ligaments? Alpha Destiny says so. What do you think about that? So let me put on my +5 weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about that. All right, guys, I hate it when someone throws in another YouTube channel there because it's almost like they're wanting me to be obligated to talk about another YouTube channel. And I probably am going to do another video later today on that because people will always, a lot of people ask me lately about that particular guy. And people need to understand there's a reason I don't endorse other specific people very often. I should probably do a separate video on that of the problems that you run into when you either accept or reject certain ideas of other channels. And a lot of it has to do with no YouTuber has enough time to watch enough of another YouTuber unless they're going to them to steal information that they want. And that does happen, but no YouTuber has enough time to actually get a full grasp of the entire message of another YouTube channel. All they're going to be able to do is a basic surface analysis of them. No one who makes YouTube videos full time or puts a lot of effort into this really is going to dedicate the time to go watch 200 videos of another channel to really understand their message. But that's kind of a separate video, the problems you run into with that. But essentially, if that is what Alpha Destiny is saying, then I disagree. I don't know what he says. I've never watched a single one of his videos. I couldn't tell you. But it's just kind of better to ask, hey, what about this concept? Because that way we can address the concept on its own without an ad hominem attack or an agreement or disagreement with someone else. And you can just take the information at face value and then apply it to those other people who you watch. It doesn't need to be about what they say. So let's get into it. The problem with heavy partials. Let's look at kind of what's being addressed here. People are saying, well, it can strengthen ligaments to do heavy partials. And meaning heavier than your 1 rep max. Because obviously if you're doing partial reps with a weight you can do for full range of motion for 1 or more reps, it's not really a heavy partial, is it? I mean, think about it. The whole point of doing partials, even when it's done for strength training purposes, is to use a weight heavier than your 1 rep max through a partial range of motion. Now, the idea people have is that, well, there's more weight loaded on the ligaments, therefore they must be getting stronger. They're being subjected to a heavier load, but they really aren't. And I want you guys to stop and think about that. We can just look at some basic exercises. And, well, there are exceptions to this, by the way. But basic exercises. All right, the bench press. Let's say you're doing lockouts with a bench press. Let's say your max is 300 pounds. And you put 400 pounds on the bar and do partials at the top part of a rack. All right? And people are like, well, that's going to strengthen your ligaments. Well, the ligaments aren't being loaded the same. What ligaments are you talking about? In the triceps? The pecs? All right, let's look at some of those tendons. All right, if your triceps are only coming down to here, look at the angles and pull being put on the ligaments and the levers in the arms. If you're doing 400 pounds for partial reps, it is not putting the same angles and stretch on the ligaments that 300 pounds is down here at the bottom. Look how much more that ligament is stretched and loaded. Look at the angles involved. You're not putting any more stress on the ligament with 400 at the top. In fact, it might not, depending on how far you're moving it, the 400 pounds at the top might not even be putting as much stress on the ligaments in the triceps as 300 does all the way down. Same thing with the chest. Look at the angles involved. The stretch put on the chest down here, right? At the bottom versus the top. There's very, very little stress on the tendon. So people are saying, well, you're putting more stress on it due to more weight. No, you're not. Have you ever seen anyone tear a pec? And remember, guys, what is a pec tear? Pec tear is usually these tendons right here detaching and causing the pec to roll up. Or it tears up here. You ever seen anyone do that at the top? Anyone ever seen that happen to the top of a lift, or is it always down on the way down? It tears when you're down here, or tears right on the way back up. When you see it tear, when you've ever seen a tear happen in person, where does it happen? 95% of the time, it's at the bottom inch of the range of motion. What does that tell you about stress being put on these tendons? or on insertion points of the muscles. The stress is when the muscle is stretched the most, when the connective tissue is stretched the most. That's when they tend to rupture and tear. So if you're up here at the point to where there's very little stress being put on it, when you add weight, do you really think you're putting more stress on the connective tissue? Well, you're putting more stress on the connective tissue at the top by adding 100 pounds than it would normally up there, but it's not putting the stress you would get anywhere close to at the bottom. So how is it overloading the ligaments? The only ligaments that are getting overloaded on the bench press doing that are the wrists. So you're going to subject your wrist to a compressive force, all right? A compressive force in the joint that they would never be subjected to during a full range of motion lift. I'm not sure that's really beneficial. It might cause some inflammation. It might toughen it up over time, but that's not necessarily going to carry over to anything useful to you in the real world, even in a competitive environment. Same thing with a squat. Which tendons and ligaments are you talking about? The knees and the hips? Same thing. You're just doing partial angles at the top. They're not even being stretched. You're just have a heavier load put on them through the easy part of the range of motion, where the connective tissue isn't actually being stretched or worked that hard. So how in the world is that going to strengthen the connective tissue? It's not. All you're doing is putting compressive force on joints by loading them heavier. And that's not necessarily always going to be a good thing, because you need to gradually increase those things. All right, when you're just so that you can do a heavier range of motion, you're compressing the spine more with a heavier weight on the squat, or compressing the wrist joints more with 100 pounds more than you've ever lifted. That's a big shift in compressive force. That's not gradual overload. All right, if you want to be able to strengthen that stuff, add 5 pounds more than it's ever been subjected to. And then a month later, add another 5 pounds. And just throwing an enormous increase on it, that's not how you build joint strength either. It's progressive overload. You stimulate, you don't annihilate. And connective tissue and joints and things have their own response to training also. That's not the best way to do it. Now, the nervous system thing, same thing. People are like, well, it's loading your nervous system. Well, I know that's a popular theory, and a lot of bench pressers like to do that, but they don't do partials to do that. They do rack lockouts to do that, to get used to holding the heavier weight. You want to know where the benefit to that comes in? Because all you're doing is getting used to unracking a heavier weight so that you get more efficient at unracking a weight and expending less energy doing it so that you can put more into the bench press on the max. It's not training your nervous system more, because again, the nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, is about what? And I don't know where they're getting the CNS thing, but they should be talking about peripheral nervous system. That's what we're talking about, PNS, not CNS. It's to recruit muscle fibers. Are you recruiting more muscle fibers doing the weakest part of the range of motion, or the strongest part of the range of motion where you can easily move more weight? No, that's not firing more motor units. It's not firing more motor units at all. So on the bench press, no, I mean, it's not necessarily training your nervous system to get better. It might be training you to get more efficient at the unracking. That's it. All right, that's all you're really doing. And I know that's popular, but it's not necessarily based upon physiology, the way the body works. And we can argue that one. That's opinion. The squat one is the only one that might have some merit. Only one that might have some merit, and that's because you're training yourself to do walkouts. And that is something a lot of raw lifters do train on the squat, because just having a heavier weight on your back has some merits as far as building stabilizers. All right, so people who do rack lockouts with 50 pounds more than their max, what that does is it's a training tool to teach you to walk out more efficiently, because it's really hard to do. A lot of lifters, because their walkout isn't efficient, it isn't effective, they haven't learned how to minimize the steps and do it with the least energy expended, it can affect their maxes in competition. So it is popular for raw lifters who have to walk out in the type of federation they compete in. They have to walk out a weight to train with walkouts using sometimes 50 pounds more than their max. What does that do? They've got a heavier load on their back than they're used to. All right, so it trains them to, number one, learn how to walk it out more efficiently with less energy use so they don't get fatigued. So they learn the most efficient foot stepping on the way back. And a proper walkout done to get you out of a rack should be basically 3 steps. And that trains you to do that because you've got a really heavy weight. So you're trying to be efficient as hell trying to walk it out so that you don't hurt yourself. You don't get injured. It will teach you to be better to do that 3-step walkout. It should be 3 total steps involved between your 2 feet on a proper walkout. And it can train you to do that. Number 2, it can train you to learn to stay upright with a really, really heavy weight. It can train stabilizers through your trunk, through your core, to try to stay upright more when loaded with a really heavy weight. But you need to understand that's a core training tool, that's a thoracic erector training tool. That's what you're doing with it. You're training stabilizers. It's not actually improving your peripheral nervous system. It's not improving your connective tissue. It's not doing any of that to do that. What it is it's training you to strengthen certain stabilizers so that you can stay upright more on the squat to do a walkout with a heavier weight than you can max. But it's not the same as doing rep work. It's absolutely not the same thing as doing partials. Big difference there. So people need to understand the merits and benefits of doing some of these things. Now, as far as the connective tissue goes, the only exercise I'm going to say you are going to get some connective tissue benefits might be the deadlift. Why? Because on the deadlift, you have certain connective tissues and tendons and ligaments that do not depend upon range of motion because you're having to hold the weight and it's pulling down. All the connective tissue through your arms and even some of the connective tissue through your shoulders and everything, tendons, ligaments, things like that, are being stretched downward towards the ground while in a locked position when you deadlift. So doing a little bit of partial work with the deadlift might strengthen some of that stuff. Okay, it might strengthen some of that stuff. It also might pop some of them off the bone, but that's another story. So there might be some merit to the connective tissue training there, and it might be some merit to it for the grip work because you're having to grip a heavier weight. Unless you're doing this with straps, you're having to grip a heavier weight than you've ever lifted. All right, now that can be a form of grip training. That can be grip work. So it can help with your grip. It might help with some of those ligaments, but that's exclusive to the deadlift. That same logic and that same methodology is not going to apply to most exercises. So that's what's really going on. Any benefits of anything involving really heavy partials, supra maximal partials. It has nothing to do for most of the exercises people are talking about. This is not strengthening your nervous system. It's not strengthening your connective tissue. There are other reasons why some people do it. So as far as a lot of that goes, I'm going to call BS on it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.